everyone. I'm Cynthia Knight. I'm the director here at the Barron Arts Center, and on behalf of myself and my staff, we met Brandon Powell. He's our program coordinator, and with us we have two commissioners. We have Jeffrey Cohen, and we also have Dr. Delore. She's the chair of the Cultural Arts Commission. She sent hello to all of you on the way in, so we're very glad and pleased to have you with us here this evening. Tonight's performance is being brought to you through the Township of Woodbridge, and we'd like to thank Mayor McCormick and the Town Council for supporting us on all of our endeavors, along with the support of the Cultural Arts Commission of Woodbridge. These people work behind the scenes to help my budget to provide additional programming. So we're having our concert tonight with All Season Chamber players, and I'm very pleased to announce that this is their 39th year playing together. It's a wonderful thing, and we have this great symbiotic relationship, and we're so pleased to have them here with us, and we're looking forward to a big party next year, so we're going to be good. I want you to, if you have your cell phones, turn them all off. A few announcements. I don't know if any of you have tuned into our grant series called the Suffragette State. We had our first performance here February 13th. We have Lucretia Mott. All women and men are created equal. So we have another performance coming up March 5th, Susan B. Anthony, Failure is Impossible, and so on. Along with this, we have concerts. So if you're not familiar with this programming, you can check on the website. If there's anything that interests you, please, I suggest you sign up at this time, as a lot of these performances are filling up quickly. The American Historical Theater does the presentations, and if you have never been to one of them here, they are something to behold. They are pretty impressive. So without any more hesitation, I am going to present All Season Chamber. Just sit back and enjoy the concert. Thank you.
J.S. Bach visiting Frederick the Great, visiting his son Carl Philipp Emanuel at the court of Frederick the Great in Potsdam. That was in the late 1740s. He made an earlier visit to the court of Frederick the Great in 1741, summer of 1741. At that time, he wrote a flute sonata. It was actually written for the King Frederick the Great's valet, a man by the name of Michael Gabriel Fredersdorf, and both Frederick and Michael were avid amateur flutists. And Bach wrote a piece, unlike the work he was writing later on, the musical offering, which was very dense and very much in the high Baroque style of voice against voice, very intricate, very, very complicated music. He wrote what was already becoming the favored style, what was known as the Galant style, which paved the way for the classical era of Mozart and Haydn. So he wrote a very lovely dance-oriented sonata. It's in E major, and it's in 4 movements, and this one is, in fact, in the sonata da chiesa form, unlike the cello sonata Zoe played. This is slow, fast, slow, fast. As you can see in your program, an adagio, an allegro, a siciliano, which is a slow dance, and an allegro assai, a fast allegro. So, without further ado. Orlando Gibbons, and it's actually from a collection called Parthenia, which is essentially the oldest keyboard music from Great Britain. And we're talking late Renaissance, early Baroque. And Parthenia refers to all of the early keyboard instruments: harpsichord, clavichord, and virginal. The name virginal could relate to the fact that this was the maiden voyage for a new instrument, or could also refer to the young maidens who usually were associated with playing those instruments. So it's kind of, sort of a little bit ambiguous, and that went over like a lead balloon. But yeah, virginal, virgin. But one of the key features of a virginal, the instrument, was that it didn't have legs, so it was portable. It was easily transportable from place to place. So we're going to have one selection from Parthenia by Orlando Gibbons. That's Lord Salisbury, Pavane, and Galliard. And then from the Fitzwilliam Virginal book, and a little bit about that, Richard Fitzwilliam was a royalty in England, and he bequeathed his entire collection of art and music to the library at Cambridge University, which he had attended in the early 19th century. So hence the Fitzwilliam Virginal book. So the second piece by William Byrd, the Walsingham Variations, which are a real treat, is in fact from the Fitzwilliam Virginal book.
I'll just say a few things. The first piece I'll play, the Gibbons. I don't know if you're familiar with the pianist Glenn Gould. He's most famous, obviously, for Bach. But he once claimed that Orlando Gibbons was his favorite composer, actually. And I don't know if, sometimes things he said you take them with a grain of salt, because he famously hated Mozart, and yet he recorded all of the piano sonatas. And he hated middle Beethoven. He thought early Beethoven was better, and then he recorded a lot of the middle Beethoven sonatas. So, with Gibbons, I do see what he's saying, though. There's this spiritual purity, I think is how he refers to it, and I really hear that. I think in a lot of the Elizabethan keyboard composers, you'll hear vocal writing on the keyboard, so it's like many parts and very elaborate voice leading. The first movement is a pavane, so it's more slow, and then there's a galliard, which is a faster, more virtuosic dance from that time period. The second piece, Walsingham, is it's a folk song based on a pilgrimage that people would go to where this woman had a vision of the Virgin Mary, apparently. And it was there was a shrine, and it was taken down during the English Reformation. And Byrd, interesting, I don't know that much about his life story, but I do know he converted to Catholicism, and he was, in hot water for a lot of his life because of that. I think he was on the recusancy list because he refused to attend Anglican services. So there are some scholars that argue that he's encoding Catholic things in this music, that maybe it's like the Defiant or something. There's certainly an interesting juxtaposition of the simplicity of this folk song, which is just that's the opening motif, and you'll hear the most elaborate, sometimes almost mysterious, mystical variations on this, simple love song. It's also considered a song of the road because it's associated with pilgrimage to Walsingham, or I think it's actually in Norfolk, England. That's where it is. So it's an interesting piece. It's 22 variations. And another interesting fact is William Byrd's student, John Bull, who became sort of a rival of Byrd, wrote 30 variations on this. And it's the first piece in the Fitzwilliam book collection. And I think it actually is, I don't know if Bach was familiar with it, but it's very similar to his Goldberg Variations, which also has 30 variations on an aria. So, you know, it's an interesting parallel.
time a bit, well, more than a little bit, quite a bit, to the High Baroque, the music of J.S. Bach, some of which you heard earlier, the flute sonata, and now a sonata in C minor, BWV 1017 for violin and harpsichord. Bach wrote most of his instrumental music while he was working at the court of Prince Leopold of Anhalt-Köthen, and this was between 1717 and 1723. The big thing that Bach did with duo sonatas was to actually make them true duo sonatas in the sense of equal partnership between the two instruments. Before this period in which he was writing, most of the sonatas were, keyboard was subordinate, kind of chords, accompanimental to the melodic instrument. But in sonatas for violin, some for flute, not as much the one you heard tonight, which was later and was using the galant style, the later style, to transition to the classical era, but also for viola da gamba, the forerunner of the cello. He wrote very, very interesting sonatas that paved the way for duo sonatas of the classical era, the Romantic era, and beyond. In this particular sonata, the interesting thing about the initial slow movement, the first movement, again, sonata decay, the slow, fast, is that it anticipates an aria that some of you may have heard from the St. Matthew Passion, Erbarme dich, mein Gott, have mercy, my Lord, which sounds extremely similar, but it came later than what you're about to hear. It also struck me, and I think Eric as well, that the other slow movement is similar to Jesu, Joy of Man's Desiring, with continuous triplets and a chorale-like theme intoned above those continuous triplets from beginning to end. It's a very, the music isn't that similar in a literal sense, but spiritually and the mood, the feeling it creates, it is very similar. And in addition to these two slow movements, you have two very, very intricate fast movements, particularly the second one, which is fugal in character. In other words, voice imitating voice. And it's one of the most restless pieces Bach ever wrote as far as the harmony. He's moving around all the time. Lots of sequences where he builds. He has material that he repeats it up and up and up or down, as the case may be. But a very, very unusual movement. This is a very sturdy kind of solid allegro, and the final allegro, which is also contrapuntal, voice against voice, is lighter and quicker. So we finish off with music of Johann Joachim Quantz. Does the name ring a bell to anyone? Not seeing any much recognition. Okay, well, a lesser known Baroque composer, but quite a good one. He was, if there was Domenico of the cello, he could be called Johann Joachim of the flute. He was everything, you name it, he did it flute-wise. He was a teacher of flute. He was a performer of flute, on the flute. He wrote treatises on how to play the flute. He repaired flutes. He also developed improvements in the flute to make it easier to play. So he was the flute guy. There's another connection to the court of Frederick the Great. Several connections that we've made tonight. He served as the flutist, flute teacher, and a court musician at Frederick the Great's court, and he taught both Frederick the Great and the dedicatee of the Bach sonata you heard earlier, the flute sonata you heard earlier, which was written for Michael Gabriel Friedersdorf. So Quantz, you'll hear in his music that we're transitioning a bit more to the galant style of composition. We still have the sonata de Kayser format, but you'll notice that the textures are a little lighter. It's not as dense as what you just heard in the Bach, and maybe not even as dense as the Telemann that you heard initially. So, Johann Joachim Quantz, Trio Sonata in C minor.